Sarah Mitchell crouched behind the rocky outcrop, her hands shaking as she adjusted the radio equipment. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountainside, and the silence felt heavy with danger. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. As a communications specialist, her job was to stay back at base camp and relay messages between the scattered patrol units. But when Sergeant Rodriguez got hit by shrapnel 2 days ago, someone had to take his place on the ridge. The other soldiers treated her like she was invisible. To them, she was just the radio girl who happened to carry a rifle she'd probably never use. They'd grunt acknowledgments when she passed along orders from command, but none of them bothered to learn her name. Even Lieutenant Barnes, who was supposed to be in charge of their small unit, barely looked at her when he gave instructions. Sarah had grown up on her father's farm in Montana, where shooting cans off fence posts was as natural as breathing. Her brothers taught her to hunt elk in the thick forest near their home, and she could hit a target at 300 yards before she turned 16. But here in the mountains of Afghanistan, surrounded by soldiers who saw her as nothing more than support staff, those skills seemed worthless. The radio crackled to life, breaking her thoughts. "Overwatch, this is Alpha Team. We're moving up the valley now. Keep us posted on any movement." Sarah pressed the transmit button. "Copy that, Alpha Team. You're clear so far." She swept her binoculars across the rocky terrain below, searching for any sign of enemy fighters. The valley looked peaceful, almost beautiful in the early morning light, but she knew better than to trust appearances. Hours passed in tense silence. Sarah's legs cramped from staying in the same position, but she didn't dare move. Through her scope, she watched Alpha Team advance slowly through the valley, checking caves and abandoned buildings. They moved like they owned the place, confident and relaxed. Too relaxed, that's when she saw them. 3 figures moving along a ridgeline about 800 yards away, barely visible against the brown rock. They carried weapons and moved with purpose, staying low and using the terrain for cover. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized they were positioning themselves for an ambush. Alpha Team had no idea what was coming. She grabbed the radio. "Alpha Team, you've got company. 3 tangos on your east ridge, about 800 meters out. They're setting up for an ambush." The response was immediate and dismissive. "Negative, Overwatch. We don't see anything." "You sure you're not looking at goats?" Sarah bit back her frustration. She'd been watching these mountains for 3 days straight. She knew the difference between goats and armed fighters. Through her binoculars, she could see one of the men adjusting what looked like a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. "Alpha Team, I'm serious. You need to take cover now. They're armed and in position. Overwatch, stay off the channel unless you see something real. We're professionals here." Sarah felt her face burn with anger and embarrassment. She looked through her scope again and her blood ran cold. The man with the RPG was taking aim at Alpha Team's position. In seconds, her fellow soldiers would be dead, and there was nothing she could do to convince them of the danger. She made a decision that would change everything. Sarah shifted her rifle, found the man with the RPG in her crosshairs, and took a deep breath. The shot had to be perfect. At 800 yards, with wind and elevation to consider, there was no room for error. She'd only get one chance. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and through her scope she watched the enemy fighter drop. His companions scattered, confused and looking for the source of the shot. One of them tried to grab the RPG, but Sarah was already lining up her second shot. Another squeeze of the trigger, and the second man fell. The third fighter disappeared behind the rocks, but the immediate threat was over. Alpha Team was safe, though they probably didn't even know they'd been in danger. Sarah's hands trembled as she lowered her rifle. She'd just killed 2 men and saved the lives of 6 soldiers who didn't even respect her. The radio remained silent. No one had seen where the shots came from, and Alpha Team continued their patrol as if nothing had happened. She spent the rest of the day in a daze, mechanically performing her duties while her mind replayed those crucial seconds over and over. By evening, when the patrol returned to base camp, word had already spread about the mysterious sniper shots that had eliminated 2 enemy fighters. The soldiers were excited, speculating about who might have taken those incredible long-range shots. Sarah listened to their conversations from her corner of the camp, cleaning her rifle in silence. She thought about speaking up, about claiming credit for the shots that had saved their lives. But she knew what would happen. They'd either not believe her, or they'd assume it was just lucky shots from the support girl. So she said nothing and let them wonder. Little did she know that someone very important was already asking questions about those shots, and soon her secret would become impossible to keep. 3 days after the incident on the ridge, Sarah noticed the camp felt different. There were more vehicles coming and going, and soldiers she didn't recognize were asking questions. The mysterious sniper shots had caught someone's attention, and that someone had enough rank to shake things up. Sarah tried to keep her head down and focus on her radio duties, but she couldn't shake the feeling that people were watching her. Lieutenant Barnes had been called away twice for meetings with officers she'd never seen before, and each time he returned looking more nervous than before. The truth was, those 2 shots had been nearly impossible. The distance, the wind conditions, the angle of the shot. Military analysts were calling it some of the finest marksmanship they'd seen in the theater. Someone with that level of skill was an asset they couldn't afford to overlook, but first they had to find out who it was. Sarah overheard conversations between the soldiers and Alpha Team. They were being questioned individually about what they'd seen and heard during the patrol. Each man swore he had no idea where the shots came from, and ballistics experts were having trouble determining the exact position of the sniper based on the bullet trajectories. Whoever it was saved our bacon, Private Johnson told his buddy while they cleaned their weapons near Sarah's radio station. Those ragheads had us dead to rights and we didn't even know it. If that mystery shooter hadn't taken them out, we'd all be going home in boxes. Sarah felt a strange mix of pride and anxiety. She'd saved their lives, but now the investigation was getting serious. Military intelligence officers were combing through personnel files, looking for anyone with advanced marksmanship training. They'd already identified 3 possible suspects among the infantry soldiers, but none of them could have made those shots from where they were positioned during the patrol. That evening, Sarah was adjusting her radio equipment when she heard boots approaching. She looked up to see a man she'd never met before, an older soldier with colonel's insignia and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Specialist Mitchell," he said, reading her name tape. "I'm Colonel Harrison, Military Intelligence. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the patrol 3 days ago." Sarah's mouth went dry, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "Yes, sir. What do you need to know?" "You were on overwatch duty that day, correct?" "What did you observe?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I saw enemy fighters positioning themselves for an ambush, sir. I tried to warn Alpha Team, but they couldn't see the threat from their position." Colonel Harrison nodded slowly. "And then what happened?" "Someone eliminated the threat with 2 very precise shots. The patrol was able to continue safely." "Someone," the colonel repeated. "Any idea who that might have been?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "No, sir. I was focused on my radio duties and monitoring the patrol's progress." The colonel studied her for a long moment, and Sarah had the uncomfortable feeling he could see right through her lie. But he simply nodded and made a note in his folder. "Thank you, Specialist. That'll be all for now." As he walked away, Sarah realized she was sweating despite the cool mountain air. The investigation was closing in, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep her secret. The next morning brought new developments. Word spread through the camp that they were getting a very important visitor. A 2-star general was flying in specifically to investigate the sniper incident. General Patricia Hawkins had a reputation as someone who got answers, and she was coming with a full team of analysts and investigators. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. A general didn't fly into a remote mountain outpost unless something big was happening. Those 2 shots had apparently made waves all the way up to the highest levels of command. She tried to focus on her duties, but her hands kept shaking as she worked the radio. Other soldiers were getting nervous too. Everyone knew that when generals started asking questions, careers could be made or destroyed based on the answers. Lieutenant Barnes called a formation that afternoon. He looked pale and tired as he addressed the assembled soldiers. "Listen up, people. We're getting some high-ranking visitors tomorrow. General Hawkins is coming to personally investigate the sniper incident from 3 days ago. I want everyone to be completely honest and cooperative. This is serious business, and the general has questions that need answers." Sarah felt 20 pairs of eyes glance in her direction. As the Overwatch operator, she was obviously going to be questioned extensively. She spent that night lying awake in her sleeping bag, staring at the stars and wondering if she should just come clean before the general arrived. But something held her back. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was the knowledge that even if she told the truth, some people would never believe that the quiet radio operator could make shots that trained snipers would struggle with. She'd spent her whole military career being underestimated, and part of her wasn't ready to give up the one secret that made her feel powerful. The helicopter appeared on the horizon just after dawn, its rotors beating against the thin mountain air. Sarah watched from her position as it landed, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. When the dust settled, General Hawkins stepped out, followed by a small army of aides and specialists. Even from a distance, Sarah could tell this was someone who commanded absolute respect. The general moved with purpose and confidence, and every soldier in the camp suddenly stood a little straighter. Sarah's radio crackled with communications as the general's team set up their temporary command center. She could hear orders being given, schedules being arranged, and personnel being summoned for interviews. It was only a matter of time before her name came up on that list. And when it did, Sarah would have to make a choice that would define the rest of her military career. General Hawkins wasted no time getting to work. Within an hour of her arrival, she had transformed the camp's small command tent into a sophisticated investigation center. Sarah watched from her radio position as specialists unpacked computers, communications equipment, and detailed maps of the surrounding terrain. The general herself was not what Sarah had expected. She was probably in her 50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She moved through the camp with quiet authority, speaking briefly with officers and making notes in a leather-bound folder. By noon, the interviews had begun. Sarah watched nervously as soldiers were called in one by one. Each man emerged from the command tent looking slightly shaken, and word quickly spread that the general was asking very specific, very detailed questions. "She knows stuff that wasn't in any of our reports," Private Martinez whispered to his squad mates. "She asked me about wind speed and temperature at exactly 0847 hours that morning." How does she even know that kind of detail? Sarah's anxiety grew with each passing hour. The general's team had obviously done their homework, and they were building a comprehensive picture of everything that had happened during the patrol. It was only a matter of time before they called her in. That afternoon, Lieutenant Barnes approached her radio station looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "Mitchell, the general wants to see you at 1600 hours. Don't be late and answer her questions honestly." Sarah nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral. She had 2 hours to prepare for what might be the most important conversation of her military career. At exactly 1600 hours, Sarah stood outside the command tent, her dress uniform crisp and her boots polished to a mirror shine. A sergeant major emerged and escorted her inside. The tent had been completely transformed. Maps covered every available surface, and multiple computer screens showed satellite imagery and ballistics analysis. At the center of it all sat General Hawkins behind a folding table studying a thick file. "Specialist Mitchell, please have a seat." The general's voice was calm but commanding. She looked up from the file and studied Sarah's face for a moment. "I've been reading about you. Grew up on a ranch in Montana. Excellent marksmanship scores and basic training, but you chose communications as your specialty. Interesting choice." Sarah felt her heart racing. "I wanted to serve where I was needed most, ma'am." "Admirable." The general flipped through several pages. "Your instructors noted that you had natural talent with long-range shooting. In fact, your qualification scores were higher than some of our designated marksmen. Yet you've never requested sniper training or specialized assignment. I'm content with my current role, ma'am." General Hawkins leaned back in her chair. "Let's talk about 3 days ago. You were on overwatch duty, monitoring Alpha Team's patrol through the valley. Tell me what you observed." Sarah repeated the same story she'd told Colonel Harrison, carefully sticking to the facts while omitting her own actions. The general listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. "You warned Alpha Team about enemy fighters on the ridge," General Hawkins said when Sarah finished. "But they didn't believe you. That must have been frustrating." "Yes, ma'am, it was." "What happened next?" 2 shots eliminated the threat, ma'am. The patrol was able to continue safely." The general studied her for a long moment. "Those were remarkable shots, Specialist. 800 yards, difficult wind conditions, moving targets. The kind of shooting that takes years of training and natural talent to achieve." Sarah remained silent, unsure how to respond. "I've interviewed every member of Alpha Team," the general continued. "I've also interviewed the other soldiers who were in the area that day. Based on their positions and the ballistics analysis, we've been able to rule out most possibilities." Sarah felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool mountain air. The shots came from the overwatch position, Specialist? The exact position where you were stationed. The tent fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment. Sarah knew this was the moment of truth. She could continue lying and hope the general couldn't prove anything. Or she could finally tell the truth. There were only 2 people who could have made those shots from that position, General Hawkins said quietly. Sergeant Rodriguez, who was wounded 2 days earlier and was still in the medical tent. And you. Sarah looked down at her hands, which were folded carefully in her lap. Her mind raced through possible responses, but she knew the investigation had reached its conclusion. Ma'am, she started, then stopped. General Hawkins leaned forward. Specialist Mitchell, I want you to understand something. Those shots saved 6 American lives. The enemy fighters you eliminated were carrying RPGs and had Alpha Team perfectly positioned for an ambush. If you hadn't acted, we would have lost good soldiers that day. Sarah looked up, surprised by the general's tone. She had expected anger or accusations, not what sounded almost like gratitude. However, the general continued, lying to superior officers during an investigation is a serious offense. I need to know the truth, and I need to know it now. Sarah took a deep breath. The weight of keeping the secret had been crushing her for days, and she suddenly realized how much she wanted to tell someone what had really happened. It was me, ma'am, she said quietly. I took those shots. General Hawkins nodded slowly as if she'd been expecting this confession. Tell me exactly what happened from the beginning. So Sarah did. She described seeing the enemy fighters, trying to warn Alpha Team and making the split-second decision to engage. She explained her background with hunting and marksmanship, and how she'd kept quiet about the incident because she didn't think anyone would believe her. When she finished, the general was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she closed the file and looked directly at Sarah. Specialist Mitchell, you have a choice to make. What you did that day was extraordinary and it saved lives. The question now is what we do with that information. General Hawkins stood up and walked to the map-covered wall of the tent. She pointed to the ridge where Sarah had been positioned and traced a line to where the enemy fighters had been eliminated. 837 meters, she said without turning around. Wind gusting from the southwest at 12 to 15 knots. Temperature differential creating thermal currents. And you made 2 perfect shots in less than 30 seconds. Sarah remained seated, unsure if she should respond. The general turned back to face her. Do you know what this means, Specialist? I'm not sure, ma'am. It means you possess a skill set that's extremely rare and extremely valuable. In my 28 years of military service, I've known perhaps a dozen soldiers capable of making those shots under those conditions. General Hawkins sat back down, and most of them had years of specialized training that you've never received. Sarah felt confused. She had expected punishment for lying about the incident, not what sounded like praise for her shooting ability. Ma'am, I know I should have reported what happened immediately. I'm ready to accept whatever consequences. The general held up a hand to stop her. Let's talk about consequences, Specialist. You disobeyed no direct orders. You engaged enemy combatants who posed an immediate threat to American forces. And yes, you initially failed to report your actions, but you've now provided a full and honest account. Sarah wasn't sure where this conversation was heading. However, the general continued, your actions raise some important questions. Why didn't you trust your fellow soldiers with the truth? Why hide such an impressive demonstration of skill and courage? Sarah thought about the question for a moment. Ma'am, they see me as just the radio operator. Support personnel. I didn't think they'd believe I could make shots like that. And why do you think that is? Because I'm a woman in a combat unit, ma'am. Because I chose communications over infantry. Because I've never pushed myself forward or demanded recognition. Sarah surprised herself with the honesty of her answer. General Hawkins nodded slowly. And how has that served you so far? Not very well, ma'am. I've been overlooked and underestimated my entire career. That ends now, the general said firmly. I'm faced with a problem, Specialist Mitchell. We have confirmed enemy sniper activity in this region. Our intelligence suggests there are at least 3 enemy marksmen operating in these mountains, and they've already killed 2 of our soldiers and wounded several others. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She hadn't realized the enemy sniper threat was so serious. Our standard response would be to request specialized sniper teams from other units, but that takes time we don't have. Meanwhile, soldiers are dying. The general leaned forward. Or I can utilize the exceptional asset I've just discovered right here in this camp. The implications of what the general was suggesting began to dawn on Sarah. "Ma'am, are you saying—" "I'm saying I want to give you a choice, Specialist. You can return to your radio duties and pretend this conversation never happened. You'll continue to be overlooked and underestimated, just as you described. Or you can step forward and use your abilities to save more lives." Sarah's mind raced. "What exactly are you proposing, ma'am?" "Immediate temporary assignment to counter-sniper operations. You'd work directly with my intelligence team to identify and eliminate enemy marksmen in this area of operations. It would be dangerous work, and it would put you in situations where your life would depend on your shooting ability." The tent fell silent again. Sarah had never imagined such an opportunity might exist, but the general was offering her exactly what she'd never dared to ask for. "There would be conditions," General Hawkins continued. "You'd report directly to me during this assignment. Your success or failure would reflect on my judgment, and if you accept, there's no going back to being invisible. Everyone would know what you're capable of." Sarah thought about the soldiers in Alpha Team who had dismissed her warnings. She thought about Lieutenant Barnes, who barely acknowledged her existence. She thought about all the times she'd been passed over for opportunities because people saw her as just support personnel. "Ma'am, I'm honored by your confidence, but I don't have sniper training. I don't have the experience that your other specialists have. You have something more important than training, Specialist. You have natural ability and the courage to use it when lives are at stake. Training can be provided. Courage and talent can't be taught." The general opened her file again and pulled out several photographs. "These are satellite images from yesterday. We've identified what we believe to be enemy sniper positions in 3 locations around this valley. Traditional military doctrine would be to call in artillery strikes or air support, but these positions are too close to civilian villages." Sarah looked at the photographs, studying the terrain and angles. "This requires precision elimination of specific threats while avoiding civilian casualties. It requires exactly the kind of skill you demonstrated 3 days ago." Sarah felt her heart pounding. Everything in her military career had led to this moment. The choice between remaining safely invisible or stepping forward to use her abilities for something that truly mattered. "If I accept this assignment, ma'am, what happens to my regular duties?" "Someone else handles the radio. Your only job would be to eliminate enemy snipers and keep our soldiers alive." The general leaned back in her chair. "I won't lie to you, Specialist. This is dangerous work. Enemy snipers are skilled, experienced, and highly motivated. Some of our best soldiers have died trying to do exactly what I'm asking you to do." Sarah nodded slowly. She understood the risks, but she also understood the opportunity. "Ma'am, if I can ask, why are you giving me this chance? You could wait for specialized teams or reassign soldiers from other units." General Hawkins smiled for the first time since Sarah had entered the tent. "Because 3 days ago, a communications specialist with no formal sniper training made 2 of the most impressive shots I've seen in my career. And because sometimes the best assets are hiding in plain sight, overlooked by everyone who should know better." Sarah felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in years. The feeling of being truly seen and valued for who she really was. "I accept the assignment." "Ma'am." The transformation began immediately. Within an hour of accepting the assignment, Sarah found herself in the general's temporary command center, studying detailed maps and intelligence reports alongside officers she'd never dreamed of working with. Master Sergeant Kevin Torres, a grizzled veteran with 22 years of experience, looked skeptical when General Hawkins introduced Sarah as their new counter-sniper specialist. He'd worked with some of the best marksmen in the military, and this young communications specialist didn't fit his expectations. "Ma'am, with respect," Torres said carefully, "shouldn't we wait for a properly trained sniper team? This situation requires someone with extensive field experience." General Hawkins fixed him with a steady stare. "Master Sergeant, 3 days ago, this soldier eliminated 2 enemy fighters at over 800 meters with 2 shots. The ballistics analysis confirms both were perfect center mass hits. Are you questioning my tactical judgment?" Torres straightened up. "No, ma'am. Just want to make sure we're using our best assets." "We are," the general said firmly. "Now brief Specialist Mitchell on the current threat situation." Torres spread 3 satellite photographs on the table. "We've identified 3 probable enemy sniper positions. They're rotating between these locations, taking shots at our patrols and supply convoys. In the past week, they've killed 2 soldiers and wounded 5 others." Sarah studied the images carefully. The positions were well chosen, elevated terrain with good fields of fire and multiple escape routes. Whoever was using these locations knew what they were doing. The longest confirmed kill was from here. Torres pointed to a ridgeline about 600 meters from the main supply route. But we think they're capable of much longer shots. They're patient, disciplined, and they only take high-percentage shots. What's our intelligence on their numbers and equipment? Sarah asked. Torres looked surprised by the professional question. 3 confirmed shooters, possibly 4. They're using Dragunov rifles, probably SVD variants, good scopes, quality ammunition. These aren't amateur fighters, General Hawkins nodded to Sarah. Your mission is to locate and eliminate these threats. You'll have full intelligence support and choice of equipment. What do you need? Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. 3 days ago, she was adjusting radio frequencies, and now she was being asked to hunt enemy snipers who had already killed American soldiers. I'll need a rifle suited for long-range precision work, something I can trust at distances up to 1,000 meters, and I'll need to study the terrain personally, not just from satellite images. Done, the general said. Master Sergeant Torres will provide equipment support and intelligence updates. You'll also have Corporal Davis as a spotter. Sarah knew Corporal Davis by reputation, a sharp young soldier with excellent observation skills. Having him as backup would be invaluable. Ma'am, there's one more thing, Sarah said hesitantly. The other soldiers in this camp don't know about my new assignment. When word gets out that the radio operator is suddenly hunting enemy snipers, there might be some resistance to accepting my authority. General Hawkins smiled grimly. Let me handle that concern. An hour later, the entire camp was called to formation. Sarah stood slightly apart from the other enlisted soldiers, still not sure how this would play out. The general took position in front of the assembled troops and spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the camp. 3 days ago, enemy fighters positioned themselves to ambush Alpha Team during their patrol. Those fighters were eliminated by 2 precision shots at over 800 meters, saving the lives of 6 American soldiers. The soldiers murmured among themselves, remembering the mysterious sniper incident. I can now reveal that those shots were fired by Specialist Sarah Mitchell. The murmur turned to shocked silence. Sarah felt dozens of pairs of eyes staring at her in disbelief. Specialist Mitchell has accepted assignment as our counter-sniper specialist. She will be hunting the enemy marksmen who have been targeting our patrols. She has my full confidence and authority, and I expect her to receive your complete cooperation. Lieutenant Barnes looked like someone had just told him the earth was flat. The soldiers from Alpha Team stared at Sarah with new understanding, finally realizing who had saved their lives. That is all. Return to your duties. As the formation dissolved, Sarah found herself surrounded by soldiers who suddenly wanted to know everything about her background and training. The invisible radio operator had become the center of attention in a single moment. Private Johnson, one of the soldiers whose life she'd saved, approached her with obvious embarrassment. Mitchell. Specialist Mitchell, I wanted to thank you for what you did out there. And I'm sorry we didn't listen when you tried to warn us. Sarah nodded, still adjusting to the dramatic change in how people were treating her. Just doing my job, Johnson. Hell of a job, he said with genuine respect. Over the next 2 hours, Sarah worked with Torres to select and test her equipment. They settled on a Remington M24 rifle with a high-quality scope, a weapon she'd trained with briefly but never used in combat situations. The rifle felt different from her personal hunting rifle, heavier and more precise. She spent an hour adjusting the scope and zeroing the weapon at various distances, with Torres providing advice and encouragement. You've got good instincts, he admitted after watching her work. General Hawkins doesn't make mistakes about this kind of thing. If she says you can do this job, then you can do it. As evening approached, Sarah found herself studying maps and planning her first mission. The enemy snipers were most active during early morning hours, taking advantage of good light and calm wind conditions. Tomorrow, she would take position before dawn and wait for them to reveal themselves. It was a complete reversal from everything her military career had been up to this point. Instead of staying safe in camp and supporting others, she would be alone in the mountains, hunting skilled enemies who were hunting her fellow soldiers. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in her military service, Sarah felt like she was using all of her abilities for something that truly mattered. The quiet farm girl from Montana was about to become something no one had ever expected. But first, She had to survive her first encounter with enemy snipers, who had already proven they were deadly accurate. Sarah crept through the darkness at 0400 hours, moving carefully across the rocky terrain toward her chosen position. Corporal Davis followed 20 meters behind, carrying the spotting scope and communications equipment. They had studied the maps for hours, selecting a location that would give them good visibility of all 3 suspected enemy sniper positions. The weight of the M24 rifle felt reassuring across her back, but Sarah's stomach churned with nervous energy. This was different from shooting at targets on her family's farm, or even eliminating the ambush team 3 days ago. Now she was actively hunting skilled enemies who were looking for her just as hard as she was looking for them. They reached their position as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. Sarah had chosen a spot on a rocky outcrop that provided excellent concealment and multiple escape routes. Davis set up the spotting scope while Sarah arranged her rifle and checked her equipment one final time. "Radio check," Davis whispered into his headset. "Lima Charlie," came Torres's voice through their earpieces. "Intelligence reports possible enemy movement in Sector 2. Stay alert." Sarah settled into her shooting position and began scanning the terrain through her rifle scope. The 3 enemy positions were spread across a half-mile area, each offering different advantages depending on wind and light conditions. Hours passed with no movement. The sun climbed higher, creating heat shimmer that would make long-distance shooting more difficult. Sarah's muscles ached from maintaining her position, but she forced herself to stay alert and focused. At 0847 hours, Davis spotted something. "Movement Sector 3, rocky outcrop about 700 meters northeast." Sarah swung her rifle toward the location and adjusted her scope. Through the magnified optics, she could see a figure moving carefully between the rocks. The person carried a rifle and moved with the deliberate caution of a trained marksman. "I see him," Sarah whispered. "Male, approximately 6 feet tall, carrying what looks like a Dragunov rifle." The enemy sniper settled into a position that gave him a clear field of fire down toward the main supply route. Sarah realized with growing alarm that a convoy was scheduled to pass through that area in less than 30 minutes. "Control, this is Overwatch," Davis spoke quietly into his radio. "We have eyes on enemy sniper in Sector 3. He's positioning for an attack on the morning convoy. Copy, Overwatch. You are cleared to engage." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. This was the moment of truth. The enemy sniper was about 700 meters away, a challenging but manageable shot. She had one chance to eliminate the threat before he could attack the convoy. She checked wind speed and direction, estimated temperature and humidity, and made minute adjustments to her scope. The enemy sniper was focused on the road below and hadn't noticed her position. Sarah controlled her breathing, found her natural respiratory pause, and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, and through her scope she watched the enemy fighter collapse. "Target down," Davis reported immediately. "Clean hit center mass, but their victory was short-lived." Almost immediately, Sarah heard the distinctive crack of a high-velocity round passing close to her position. A second enemy sniper had been watching and waiting for exactly this moment. "We're compromised," Davis shouted as another bullet struck the rocks near their position, sending fragments flying. Sarah rolled to her left and found new cover behind a large boulder. Through her scope, she searched desperately for the source of the incoming fire. The second sniper had chosen his position well. He could see their location but remained hidden from their view. "I can't spot him," Davis called out, frustration evident in his voice. "He's firing from somewhere in Sector 1, but I can't get a visual." Another shot rang out, this one even closer. Sarah realized they were pinned down by a sniper who had the tactical advantage. He knew exactly where they were, while they could only guess at his position. "Control, this is Overwatch. We're taking accurate fire from an unknown position. Request immediate support." "Negative, Overwatch. Closest support is 20 minutes out. You need to neutralize the threat." Sarah's mind raced through her options. They could try to retreat, but that would expose them to more accurate fire. They could wait for support, but the enemy sniper might relocate before help arrived. Or she could try something that went against every tactical principle she'd been taught. "Davis, I'm going to move to a new position. When I give you the signal, I want you to fire 3 rounds towards Sector 1. Doesn't matter if you hit anything. I just need him focused on your position for about 10 seconds. "Mitchell, that's crazy. If you move, you'll be completely exposed. It's the only way. He knows where we are now, but he doesn't know where I'm going." Sarah studied the terrain between her current position and a rocky ledge about 50 meters to her right. It was a dangerous move, but it would give her a completely different angle on the suspected enemy position. She took a deep breath and sprinted from cover. Davis opened fire immediately, sending 3 rapid shots toward the enemy position. Sarah heard the enemy sniper's rifle crack in response, but the shot was aimed at Davis's location, not at her exposed position. She dove behind the rocky ledge just as another enemy round struck where she'd been standing moments before. From her new position, she had a clear view of the slope where she suspected the enemy sniper was hidden. Sarah scanned methodically through her scope, looking for any sign of movement or unnatural shapes. The enemy was well concealed, but patient observation had always been one of her strengths. There, a slight reflection from glass, probably a rifle scope, about 600 meters away. Sarah could barely make out the outline of a human figure positioned behind some scrub brush and rocks. She adjusted her scope for the distance and wind conditions, then settled into her shooting position. The target was partially concealed, leaving her with a very small window of opportunity. The enemy sniper fired again at Davis's position, and for just a moment he shifted slightly to work the bolt on his rifle. It was the opening Sarah needed. She squeezed the trigger smoothly and watched through her scope as the enemy fighter jerked backward and disappeared behind the rocks. "Target down!" she called out. Second sniper eliminated. Davis emerged from his cover, looking shaken but impressed. "Mitchell, that was either brilliant or completely insane." "Maybe both," Sarah admitted, surprised by her own calm voice. Her heart was pounding, but she felt strangely confident. "Control, this is Overwatch. 2 enemy snipers eliminated. Area is secure for convoy passage. Outstanding work, Overwatch. Return to base for debrief." As they gathered their equipment and began the trek back to camp, Davis shook his head in amazement. "I've worked with some good snipers, but I've never seen anyone adapt that quickly under fire. Where did you learn to think like that?" Sarah thought about the question as they walked. "Growing up hunting, I guess. Sometimes the deer don't cooperate with your plan, so you have to improvise." When they reached the camp, word of their success had already spread. Soldiers who had barely acknowledged Sarah a day before now looked at her with obvious respect and curiosity. She had eliminated 3 enemy snipers in her first 2 engagements, protecting both a patrol and a supply convoy. General Hawkins was waiting in the command tent with Torres and several other officers. She looked up from a map as Sarah and Davis entered. "Excellent work today, Specialist. The convoy reported no hostile activity, and our surveillance confirms both targets were eliminated." "Thank you, ma'am." Davis provided outstanding support. The general nodded approvingly. "I'm updating your mission parameters. Intelligence suggests there are at least 2 more enemy snipers operating in this area. Your next assignment will be more complex, a coordinated hunt for multiple targets who now know they're being hunted." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. She had proven herself capable, but the enemy would adapt their tactics now that they knew there was an American counter-sniper in the area. "Ma'am, they'll be more careful now. Harder to locate and eliminate." "Undoubtedly. That's why this assignment is so important, and why I chose someone with your particular combination of skills and instincts." As Sarah left the briefing, she realized that her life had completely changed in just 4 days. The overlooked radio operator was becoming someone whose actions directly impacted the safety of every soldier in the camp. But the real test was still coming. The remaining enemy snipers would be the most skilled and cautious, and they would be actively hunting her just as she was hunting them. 2 weeks later, Sarah had become a legend in the camp. She had successfully eliminated 5 enemy snipers, disrupted multiple ambush attempts, and single-handedly made the mountain roads safer for American forces. But with success came new challenges, and the remaining enemy fighters had adapted their tactics to counter her effectiveness. General Hawkins called her to the command tent for what she said would be their final briefing. Sarah entered to find the general studying intelligence reports with a concerned expression. "Specialist Mitchell, we have a problem. Our sources indicate that the enemy has brought in a specialist of their own, a highly skilled sniper with experience fighting American forces in other theaters." Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. "What do we know about him, ma'am?" "Very little, unfortunately. He goes by the name Ghost, and is reportedly responsible for killing over 20 coalition soldiers in Iraq and Syria. He's patient, extremely accurate, and has never been captured or eliminated despite multiple attempts." The general handed Sarah a folder containing several photographs and intelligence summaries. He arrived 3 days ago, and we believe his mission is specifically to eliminate you. Sarah studied the limited information available about this new threat. The man was a professional killer who had spent years perfecting his craft against American forces. Unlike the local fighters she had been hunting, this enemy understood exactly how she thought and operated. "Ma'am, what are my orders?" "Your orders are to eliminate this threat before he eliminates you." "But Sarah," the general's voice became more personal, "this isn't like your previous missions. This man will be actively hunting you, using all the same skills and tactics that have made you successful." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. For the first time since accepting this assignment, she was facing an enemy who might be better than she was. "I'll need to change everything about how I operate. New positions, different timing, altered patterns. He'll be studying my previous engagements looking for weaknesses." "Exactly right. Master Sergeant Torres has identified several possible locations where Ghost might position himself. But Sarah, I want you to know that if you feel this mission is beyond your capabilities, no one would question your decision to step back." Sarah considered the general's words carefully. In just 2 weeks, she had gone from being invisible support personnel to being the camp's primary defense against enemy snipers. She had proven herself capable of incredible marksmanship and tactical thinking, but this felt different. "Ma'am, with respect, I didn't accept this assignment because it was safe. I accepted it because soldiers were dying and I had the skills to stop it." "That hasn't changed." General Hawkins smiled with obvious pride. "I hoped you'd say that. But this time you won't be hunting him. You'll be bait." The plan was elegantly simple and terrifyingly dangerous. Sarah would position herself in a location where Ghost could observe her, but where she would have multiple escape routes and defensive positions. When he revealed himself by taking a shot, she would have seconds to locate and eliminate him before he could fire again. Sarah spent the entire night preparing for what she knew might be her final mission. She cleaned and checked her rifle repeatedly, studied maps of the area until she could navigate it blindfolded, and mentally rehearsed every possible scenario. At 0300 hours, she moved out alone. Davis had wanted to accompany her, but this mission required maximum stealth and mobility. She carried only her rifle, minimal ammunition, and basic survival gear. The position she had chosen was the exposed, rocky ledge that offered excellent visibility, but limited cover. Any sniper in the area would see it as an obvious location, which was exactly what she was counting on. Ghost would expect her to use concealment and camouflage, not expose herself so boldly. Sarah settled into position just as the sun began to rise, making herself deliberately visible to anyone watching through a scope. She felt like a deer standing in an open meadow during hunting season, but she forced herself to remain calm and alert. Hours passed without incident. The sun climbed higher, creating the heat shimmer that made precision shooting more difficult. Sarah began to wonder if Ghost had even taken the bait, or if he was patient enough to wait days for the perfect shot. At 11:47 hours, her question was answered. The distinctive crack of a high-velocity rifle round echoed across the mountains, and rock fragments exploded from the ledge 6 inches from her head. Ghost had revealed his position, but his shot had been just slightly off target. Sarah rolled immediately to her left, taking cover behind a boulder while scanning desperately for the source of the shot. Ghost was good, very good, but that single muzzle flash had given her the information she needed. Through her scope, she could see a position about 900 meters away, where the morning light created a slight shadow inconsistent with the natural terrain. Ghost had concealed himself expertly, but not perfectly. Sarah knew she had perhaps 30 seconds before he relocated to a new position. She made rapid calculations for distance, wind, and elevation, then settled into her shooting position. The target was barely visible even through her high-powered scope. She could make out what might be part of a human outline, but it was more of an educated guess than a clear shot. Sarah controlled her breathing, found her natural respiratory pause, and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, and she immediately rolled to new cover as Ghost's second shot struck exactly where she had been lying. Through her scope, she searched for any sign that her shot had been effective. For several minutes, nothing moved in the enemy position. Then she saw something that made her heart race. Fresh blood on the rocks where Ghost had been hidden. She had hit him, but was he dead or just wounded? Sarah waited another 20 minutes watching for any sign of movement before cautiously approaching the enemy position. What she found there would stay with her forever. Ghost had been a man probably in his 40s, with the weathered face of someone who had spent years in combat zones. Her shot had been perfect, center mass instantly fatal. More importantly, she found detailed notes and photographs showing that Ghost had been studying her tactics and patterns for days. He had known exactly how she operated, where she liked to position herself, and what her preferred shooting positions were. If she had followed her established patterns, Ghost would have killed her easily. But by changing everything and using herself as bait, she had managed to turn his expertise against him. Sarah radioed back to camp to report the successful elimination of the enemy sniper. As she made her way back to base, she reflected on how completely her life had changed in just 2 weeks. She was no longer the invisible radio operator who got ignored and overlooked. She had become someone whose actions directly saved lives, whose skills were recognized and valued, and whose courage had been tested under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. When she reached the camp, General Hawkins was waiting with news that the remaining enemy snipers had abandoned their positions and withdrawn from the area. Sarah's successful elimination of Ghost had broken the back of the enemy sniper threat. "Specialist Mitchell," the general said with obvious pride, "you have exceeded every expectation I had when I offered you this assignment. You've proven that sometimes the best assets are hiding in plain sight, overlooked by people who should know better." Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment, but also a deep understanding of how much she had grown. The quiet farm girl from Montana had discovered strength she never knew she possessed, and had used those strengths to make a real difference in the lives of her fellow soldiers. She was no longer just support personnel. She was a warrior who had found her true calling in the most unlikely circumstances, and proved that courage and skill could emerge from the most unexpected places.